My name is Benjamin Bell from EduWorks, and it's my privilege to be your session chair for this afternoon. This is the best paper session number 2. Some of you may have been in on the earlier one. In this afternoon's best paper session, we'll hear from the nominees from 3 subcommittees, training, simulation, and human performance analysis and engineering, which is a mouthful, which is why we all call it HPA. So as you might guess, we have 3 outstanding presentations this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to all of them. A few quick housekeeping items. Please note the location of the fire exits in the back and along the sides. I'd go with the back, right? Secondly, please refrain from flash photography and from video. You're welcome to use regular photography without a flash, and you're encouraged, in fact, and then you can post on your platforms and really show love for the 3 great presentations that we're about to hear. So first is a nominee for Best Paper from the Simulation Subcommittee, and we'll be hearing from Dave Urban and Ryan Pritchard. Dave is a former Air Force pilot with over a decade of flight experience in both KC-135 and T-6, and Dave was one of 2 primary authors of Advance for the Innovation Flight Syllabus. This is when the Air Force was transitioning from legacy pilot training into undergraduate pilot training. Dave also co-authored the first 2 UPT 2.5 syllabi, and since leaving the Air Force a couple years ago, he has continued to support 19th Air Force PTT as a pilot training subject matter expert for Vertex Solutions. We'll also be hearing from Dave's collaborator, Ryan Pritchard, who's also a former Air Force pilot with over 1,900 flight hours in the C-130J and the T-6. Ryan's last assignment was as a T-6 instructor pilot advance, where he worked as the 71st Flying Training Wing Chief of Innovation. So we're in very good hands. Ryan oversaw the expansion of the UPT 2.5 program, as well as leading several innovation flight programs that continued to develop VR technologies that we'll be hearing something about this afternoon. Ryan holds a master's degree in information technology and still serves the Air Force as a civilian T-6 sim instructor at Vance. So please join me in welcoming Dave Urban and Ryan Pritchard.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Urban. I'm known by many as Cowboy. And welcome to Beyond Illusions, where my co-author, Ryan Pritchard, and myself will be sharing with you some of the lessons we learned from our study of the Air Force's integration of VR flight simulators into pilot training. The points in this presentation will follow the path we took to fully appreciate what VR changed about flight instruction. You can see what we're going to follow through here. To open up, when we think about simulators, this is likely close to the image that comes to mind for most of us. A sleek pod on stilts packed with high-end computers with the best in-flight models and software. I see a couple military aviators in here. This may not resonate for you as much. This is not an AI deepfake. Civilians just get nice toys. Sorry. But let's not stop here, because when we look inside the pod, there's a whole lot more to see. It turns out that underneath the modern shell, what the pilot sees has been functionally untouched for over 50 years. At their heart, simulators are cockpits cut out of the airplane and stuck inside a box. And all of the pilot experience has not been changed by decades of technological growth. Instead, what we have seen is technology drive the cockpit in a pod concept even further. And the relentless refinement of this old concept, this is not an accident. Simulator design follows a training theory that is so ingrained that at this point it is almost invisible. But it's not quite, and so we're going to go ahead and take a look at that theory now. From the very beginning, the purpose of a flight simulator was to train skills that were either inefficient or unsafe to learn in the air. This role has been enabled by the fact that flight simulator hours are generally cheaper than the aircraft. To be useful for this role, though, what a pilot learns in the simulator must be repeatable in the aircraft. This repeatability makes good transferable training the ultimate goal of simulator design. Every piece going into a simulator must answer to this goal. The stakes in flight training are so high that failing to get this right is not an option. Where do we get our understanding of transfer? At the same time as the Wright brothers were unlocking the secrets of powered flight, Edward Thorndike was gaining fame as the founder of educational psychology. And one of the things that he's remembered for is his claim that FARD transfer does not exist. What he posited was that a learned skill or task will only transfer between disciplines if the elements of transfer are identical. Basically, if you learn how to estimate the area of a square, you would not be able to use that skill to estimate the area of a triangle or a rectangle. This is one of the things he used to support his claim. What he did with that claim, though, is that he kicked off over a century of debate about the nature of transfer, one that to this day is still not settled in educational circles. Aviation training, however, seems wholly undisturbed by the long debate. Whatever other disciplines may say, transfer through identical elements has become the core principle of simulator design. Taking the form of physical replication requirements, it permeates through device and training design and is established in government certification regs. Now, it is possible that this concept would not have taken such deep root without the second design principle, one which flight instructors often also associate with Thorndike. The laws of learning are well known in education. The original three, readiness, exercise, and effect, did in fact come from Edward Thorndike. The other three, though, primacy, recency, and intensity, those were added later by others. And what you see quoted on screen, that is the description of primacy from the most recent edition of the FAA Flight Instructor's Handbook. It's here for two reasons. The first is that this law is often the first and sometimes the only law of learning that comes to mind for flight instructors when they are thinking in the flight instruction realm. The chief reason for this being that bad habits and negative training have cost countless lives, and preventing this is always an imperative for instructors. A common term to describe what primacy seeks to avoid is negative transfer. And with simulators often being the first instruction that a student receives for any aircraft, the desire to avoid negative transfer combines with Thorndike's identical elements to drive the creation of the most perfect simulators possible. Any mistakes or inaccuracies found in a device are often treated as training limits to prevent a primacy error. The second reason this is up here is I did months of research on training methods, and the flight community is the only place I found where this understanding of primacy even exists. And thus far, the only source for this modern definition that I found is here, the original 1977 Aviation Instructor's Handbook. We have this because we've been cheating off our own homework for 50 years without any challenges. And this brings us to the core principles of simulator design. The first is that physical replication is the primary prerequisite for training value in a simulator. The second principle is that simulators must avoid negative transfer. So they must be correct in order to ensure that any instruction given on them is also correct. At face value, these are fully positive principles, but when those principles run into the real world, what is the impact of that?
This leads to high cost, providing a limited value. The T-6A is the first aircraft every student pilot flies in Air Force pilot training. There are also 3 flight simulators that have been approved for training in the use in the T-6. The lowest fidelity simulator is the unit training device, or the UTD, which is solely a replica of the T-6 cockpit. Instrument flight trainers, or IFTs, are the same hardware as a UTD, but provide a front screen for external display. The highest fidelity device for use in training is the Operational Flight Trainer, or the OFT, which provides a wraparound screen around the device. All of these devices come at a fraction of the cost of the aircraft. The Immersive Training Device, or ITD, capitalizes on the value of mental immersion and are only augmented by the fundamental physical controls, providing an orders of magnitude lower cost. This ITD was developed intentionally with the use of readily available COTS hardware simulator components. It has a generic set of Brunner rudder pedals, a stick from an F-16, and a throttle quadrant from the A-10, none of which come from the T6. Even more, the landing gear switch is a switch rather than a handle. There are two flap levers, only one of which is the same or similar to what is found in the actual aircraft. The only true replication on the device happens virtually inside of the headset. Here are the major syllabus changes from the syllabus revisions from the last several years. For anyone like us in the room who went through UPT, the legacy training syllabus will look familiar. Pre-flight training was historically reserved for academics, and there were very few simulator events prior to flight. That changed with the intermediate syllabus, where the production pressures led to moving 13 simulator events into the pre-flight phase to ease scheduling concerns. This major movement of devices did not change the overall training mindset, but it did give students better practice before they started actually flying the aircraft. UPT 2.5 was the first rethinking of training methods in decades, and it brought with it a shuffling of the pre-flight training. While the academic and simulator training was effectively retained, the implementation and addition of ITDs enabled the shuffling of which devices were required for each training event. As we look at the number of pre-flight simulator events across syllabi, you can see the shifts in training we discussed in the previous slide. The intermediate syllabus added 13 events to the pre-flight phase, all of which, or a majority of which, occurred in the highest fidelity devices. The addition of VR devices in UPT 2.5 allowed us to adjust the fidelity requirements for several legacy training events.
Oh, what needs to be pointed out, though, is that these ITD events that are using the simulator we just showed a couple slides earlier, those are not randomly scattered throughout training. There was an intentional method to the way that they were placed into the training flow. VR is most effective for mental rehearsal, and because of that, a learning flow was created in UPT 2.5 that for each maneuver a student learned, they first had a classroom or computer lesson that described the maneuver. Following that, they went to the ITD to get their first actual introduction and practice for that maneuver. And this did not just apply to individual maneuvers, but it went all the way up to and through full flight rehearsals. And it was only after this VR introduction that students would continue on to receive additional refinement in the legacy sims. But that's not always the case. In many instances, students went directly from training in the VR devices to the aircraft. When you look at the concept of primacy from before, it is entirely correct to say that for these students, their entire flight foundation was poured in VR. So to test that foundation, we took advantage of one of aviation's oldest traditions. For those not familiar, the first time a student flies in an aircraft is effectively a freebie. The only expectation of the student is that they're going to spend the entire sortie trying to break the airplane, and the instructor is going to spend the entire sortie telling them no. But since nothing in life is free, after they land, the student gives the instructor $1, and the name and tradition is born. The dollar right does serve two training purposes, though, that are helpful for us. One, it is an orientation to the aircraft and to the flight environment for the student. Second, and more importantly for us, though, is that this is a low to no stakes evaluation of the student's training baseline. What that means is that the instructors will give the student as many opportunities as possible to attempt a maneuver and then grade them objectively with no external pressures to improve their performance or to massage the grades in any way. When an instructor finds a student is incapable of a maneuver, they will give them a demonstration and then mark that demonstration in the grade sheet. And what this means is that the dollar ride is likely the most objectively and completely graded sortie a student will ever fly. The good news for us is that this flight has been conducted in the same manner since the Wright brothers. This tradition is deeply ingrained in the way that has allowed it to survive through all of the revisions in UPT. And because of that, it served as a perfect point of convergence for our data analysis. It is the moment where pre-flight training changes are going to be the most evident, but it is before any of the changes in flight line training have a chance to impact our results. So we pulled every dollar-right grade sheet at Vance Air Force Base, from the last version of the intermediate syllabus, as well as from the first version of UPT 2.5. That gave us close to 900 flights to analyze. From those flights, we then took every possible maneuver between them, and that was directly comparable. And we found 40 maneuvers where we could directly compare student performance from the intermediate and the UPT 2.5 syllabus. And I'm going to give you a real quick graph overview before we show you everything. Data from the intermediate syllabus is going to always be green on these graphs. UPT 2.5 is blue. We separated out every individual maneuver for you to see and then showed them in two different ways. The first way we showed that is in the line graphs you'll see. And those line graphs show the distribution of every recorded instance of the maneuver being flown in the grade sheets. And the reason I point this out is that the grade of 1 that you see on the bottom axis, that grade of 1 is where the instructor provided a demo where the student did not attempt it. We kept this in the data set as it felt like a good way one of the ways to compare student capabilities between the two syllabi. The bar graphs, however, those show the averages of all student maneuver attempts that we have in our records. We scrubbed out any instructor demos from that so that on the bar graphs you get a clean comparison between the student performance on the two different versions. Let's go ahead and jump into that. Here's the first set of maneuvers. There's going to be 2 slides of this. We have the first set shown a bit larger just to give you a sense of what we found. Notable here is that we have grades from all phases of flight represented. You will see that even more when you get to the next slide. But what you see across all of those phases is a consistent positive shift in grade distributions for every maneuver that we measured after VR training. You can also see this in the jump in the average student grades. Many of those jumps are significant. Here are the remaining graphs. The story doesn't change at all on these, but there are a couple details that we found here and we need to point out. The first is that on the right side on the graphs on the right side, those are maneuvers where we did not have enough recorded attempts to find statistical significance in the results. Those are maneuvers where there is very little value in attempting them on a dollar ride, so this is not a surprising outcome for us. And is a good area for continued study. The bottom middle, those are maneuvers that we called out because the number of attempts shown was well below the rest of the data set. They all showed statistically significant improvement after VR, but it felt intellectually disingenuous to not at least call them out for further analysis later on. Notably, though, on this bottom middle, there are still more data points available for those maneuvers than many other published studies have for their entire test population. So take this call out with a grain of salt. The final graphs are here, aerobatics. And we have them shown separately, firstly because UPT 2.5 was the first syllabus that allowed these on the dollar ride, so we have nothing to compare them to. But more interestingly than that, and the reason why I show them, is every maneuver here is one that the students only saw and practiced in VR prior to the aircraft. Aerobatics initially were going to be left entirely out of the pre-flight phase because conventional wisdom says that you can't train these in VR. But the decision was made to leave them in and see if the students could defy conventional wisdom, which you see here. I will point out that doing well in an aileron roll, that's a given. It's actually the easiest thing you can do in the airplane. It's literally easier than flying straight and level. But what we did see and what caught our attention was the number of complex maneuvers that were being graded highly on the first time a student ever got in the aircraft. So there it is. Honestly, the results in the data surprised even the two of us. We were trained under conventional sim theory, and we expected to see it hold up in at least a few of the grades, but it didn't. What we saw is that positive transfer occurred in every graded maneuver, including ones that should have been negative because of incorrect switch placement or missing physical controls. And we also saw a strong counter to the prevailing understanding of the law of primacy. At least one of the 40 maneuvers evaluated should have reflected the use of wrong controls for first exposure. And we didn't even discuss yet the fact that several of the VR events were self-guided with no instructor present to make corrections. After considering the data we present to you, that we've been asking the wrong questions about physical replication simulators. Instead of continuously chasing for as much as we can get, it would be better for us to ask instead, how much is enough? Thank you for your time. Are there any questions? Yes.
Yeah, just to clarify, was that data from VR Sim straight to aircraft or VR Sim, legacy Sim, then aircraft?
The data was a comparison between syllabi, most specifically. It showed what happened after VR was introduced into the program. So it's more in the paper than here, but what we saw was when you look at the two pre-flight programs, the academics and simulator, the legacy simulators between the two were very much the same. The only major variable between the data sets was the addition of the VR simulators into the program.
The VR Sims, did the students have more access to those VR Sims where they might have had, more opportunities for sets and reps individually? Would that be, was that an opportunity for them?
They did have that opportunity. The biggest reason we wanted to call this out the way we did is that the purpose of what we saw, the point of what we saw here is that yes, there was more access, but the biggest thing is that this was access to devices that, again, have zero physical replication, no motion, nothing is correct about the way the students are using it. So if we are looking at this from the standard view of replication equals transfer, then those additional sets should have reinforced the negative training that we would expect.
So the improvement could be because of additional reps and sets, regardless of the fidelity of the sim.
In short, the question is why are they better after VR? And one answer is better sets and reps, but to accept that, you have to accept the premise that VR is an effective training medium.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
As far as the VR, was there any AI interface as far as the instructor input as they're doing the maneuver? Or did they follow a glide path that is set for them in the demo and then they try to capture it?
No, these were almost all simple instructor-led sorties, just like you would see in the other simulators. There were a couple events where some level of artificial instruction was provided, but it was not anything close to some of the AI instruction that you'll see a lot out in the show floor. This was very basic level kind of instruction provided. Everything else was either self-practice or instructor-led for those initial introductions.
So the slide showed that you had an increase in the number of VR sims and then you decreased your height sims and it got proportional. Is that correct?
We found that when we had the VR sims in there, we were able to do the same type of things in those legacy sims in lower fidelity versions of it because we were now doing refinement instead of introduction. So the number of sims was almost the same. It was 2 fewer, and then we did end up shifting some of them over. While we were still covering the same maneuvers in them, we just found we didn't need to have as much fidelity for all of those introductions again because VR was the first introduction.
So do these data suggest that learners are more forgiving than we'd like to think?
When you say forgiving, do you mean forgiving of errors in the devices?
Fidelity of what they're being trained on. If we're saying that the VR there's a gap in fidelity, and that would suggest that the learner is more fluid and plastic in their ability to kind of roll with the punches, so to speak, and learn even when the environment is different from the final environment.
Yeah. The big thing that we found more than anything else was that the mental immersion, the visual element that creates the mental immersion was actually far more powerful in creating a good training environment for transfer than we may have previously believed. That's the biggest thing that we saw from this. We didn't see students having negative impacts and then having to undo them later. What we found instead was that when they were fully immersed in there, it was a positive training environment, and we were able to get far more value out of it than you might have suspected based purely on the lack of physical replication. I saw one back here first.
Were there any other significant changes in the syllabus? You know, number of sets of reps, number of hours with the students, training days? I mean, were all the other variables constant, or did it change under the VR 2.5 syllabus?
Prior to the dollar ride, all of the variables were held nearly constant. We had the exact same set of instructors, we had the exact same courses, we had a lot of the exact same timeline and flow of student training. There were some shuffles in the way some of it was ordered,
That was all academic.
but this was all the academic and some training that we had in the intermediate syllabus that was still present in the 2.5. So the real difference in them was the addition of VR.
So there was additional sorties, additional sets of reps
In VR only.
in the VR only as opposed to the legacy syllabus, is that correct?
Correct. So yeah, and that was the point of this, is that when you see these two data sets, we are comparing like syllabi, except that 2.5 has the 27 ITD events as the first exposure a student has.
Also of note, in the paper, it also talks about the other syllabi prior to the intermediate syllabi too. So it shows the differences and the similarities across the three, and it actually shows there was a marked improvement or increase in the number of sims added from the very first syllabus we looked at to the intermediate, and then from intermediate to 2.5, they were relatively about the same. So based off of traditional theory and logic, you would expect to see better performance after the first to second iteration with the implementation of actual sims or of legacy simulator events. And so that was what we were looking at, and this just shows the actual addition of VR because there wasn't as much of an improvement that you would expect to see within those first two syllabi.
And I'll just point out that we have a far more robust dive into the data in the paper that we obviously just didn't have time to look at here. So there's a lot more of this that you can read when the papers are published.
When are they going to be published? I'd really like to see it.
It's going to be on the ITSEC paper repository. If you Google ITSEC 2024 papers, I believe it'll be the week after this, but I'm waiting just like you.
One more?
One more.
So are you guys saying that the type training that you had in VR, where you had the different components from different airplanes, there was little deficiency in training, the fact that they didn't replicate the flight controls exactly?
The one grade where we expected to see some form of that negative transfer and not see improvement was in-flight checks. Because that's the one where you're going to see things like incorrect flap lever, incorrect gear handle, those placements being wrong, and just the lack of fidelity. And even in that grade, there is marked improvement after VR. And so the thing that we saw is that there is no evidence in the data set that we can see that there was any negative training after this. Every single one of them improved. And
Would you say it would improve with the exact type flight controls and switch places available?
that's a much longer answer, and I would love to discuss that with you afterwards. But that's a much bigger conversation.
He's getting the hook. So please join me in thanking our presenters. Is Jean-Paul here? Okay. Oh,
So I have this in my flash, the PPT.
no, you have to use the slides that are on the machine.
Oh, is already there?
Yep.
We did slide changes. Is it possible to use the one I have on my flash?
No, you had to do that ahead of time with ops.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. They went over this at the speakers meeting. Um, Oh, that's not you, right? You?
Okay, yeah.
And it's Ainam, as I said? Is that the last name?
Yeah, that's the last name.
Ainam, okay. All right, so I'll introduce you and then you can start.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about the slides, but they
Okay,
don't want to change it.
Okay.
All right, well, we are ready for our second outstanding paper. This,
You're staying here for the second paper, I need to scan you.
of course we're staying for the paper. Yeah, so please let the usher scan you, but we'll get started. Where? Oh, okay. So this nomination is for Best Paper is from the Training Subcommittee, entitled Airway Skills Assessment with Spatio-Temporal Attention Mechanisms Using Human Gaze. And by the end of the talk, you'll understand what that title means. I did once I read through the paper. The presenter this afternoon is Dr. Jean-Paul Ainam, who is a research scientist at the Center for Modeling, Simulation, and Imaging in Medicine at RPI, focusing on machine learning applied to videos. And Dr. Ainam's research interests include generative adversarial networks, or GANs, scene understanding, and deep neural network architectures designed for multi-view and multimodal data. Again, you'll get smarter by the end of the talk, and you'll know what all those great words means. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jean-Paul Ainam.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah. All right. This looks like it's not sure.
Good? Okay. That's why you're the doctor.
All right. This presentation will be about airway skill assessment with spatial temporal attention mechanism using human gaze. We are a team of from different universities. I'm from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and then we have team from the university at Buffalo. We also have expert coming from the U.S. Army CCDC Development Center. We also have our principal PI from the Florida State University. So for a little bit of context, we all know that airway management skill is a very important aspect of the training, as it can be necessary to perform an ETI procedure in a stress environment. If you take the example of the military, at times we will like to perform ETI on an injured soldier, and we need to predict in real time whether the procedure is successful or not. So in this study, our objective is to integrate gaze and video data to improve the assessment of airways management skill. So the problem is that traditional assessment rely heavily on subjective evaluation. Usually we need an expert to kind of watch the procedure and tell whether the procedure is successful or not. And usually we have a list of checklists that a trainee has to kind of complete to get either a fail or a success kind of score. So those traditional methods actually fail to measure competency in high stress and real world scenario accurately. So we kind of decide to propose something that is based on gaze information collected as the user performed the ETI procedure. So we started by creating a binary mask using a chronicle delta function. So this function assigns 1, a non-zero value, at every single point where there's an X and Y coordinate of the human gaze. And every other area that the area doesn't have X and Y coordinate, we give the value of 0, as you can see in the first row of this image. So after assigning a chronicle delta function to our mask, we perform a pixel propagation to reduce sparsity. Assigning 0 means you will get a lot of value that have completely 0, and you can easily mask out those other important area because you will end up with a lot of non-zero value center at the, in fact, center the origin of the image. So by using a pixel propagation based on the Euclidean distance, you can actually propagate the original X and Y coordinate of our gaze point. So that's why if you see for alpha equal to 0.5, we have a little bit dense area at the center of the image. As we increase the value of alpha, we tend to kind of include all the region of interest. So we use a decay function to reduce the influence of D, because as you move further away from the origin of the image, there's actually less and less informative kind of activity going around, because the farther you are away from the gaze, the less important the feature extracted from those points are important to your classification. So we also use a threshold to kind of stop the propagation, because as you include more pixels, you have to stop at some point. So this is the function that we have defined, max of alpha, beta, if alpha is greater than 0. So the first region gives us the visual mask, and the second row shows how we kind of apply the mask on top of every videos or images. And by doing so, we are able to kind of cancel all the other regions that are of less interest. So one more thing that was also applied during this visual mask step is the Gaussian convolution. So the objective of this Gaussian convolution was to reduce the error introduced by gaze measurement. We all know that sometimes when we perform a ETI procedure, one can look away from the center of the point. So by applying a Gaussian convolution on our mask, we are able to somehow remove those errors that were introduced by those gaze measurement. And this is the function that defines our Gaussian convolution. Okay. So this is the framework. It's, we have a little bit of math here. The framework is composed of an autoencoder. So an autoencoder is a machine learning model that learns to encode the inputs into a compressed representation, and also decode the latent representation back to the original input. And we train the autoencoder by minimizing a pixel loss function that is defined as a mean square error. You kind of compute the error between the input video or image and the predicted input image. And so the whole training is unsupervised, so we actually don't need any label. We can just collect data, video and image, and then we feed that into our autoencoder. And we train the autoencoder. After training the autoencoder, we are able to extract feature representation. So if the video has a size of 225 by 225, we are able to compress the video into 32 feature vector, and the video is used for feature tasks. So if you see the function to minimize during our autoencoder framework, this loss function actually uses pixel within the image. And sometimes this pixel, the difference of pixel doesn't actually capture the feature representation. So what we did was to include something called a perceptual loss. The perceptual loss is actually similar to pixel loss, but it's applied at the feature level. So the difference of features, the difference of values is applied at the lower dimension, not at the input or output space. All right. So after training our autoencoder, we get a compressed representation of the video, and then we feed this input into another framework that we call the attention module. So this attention module will take our mask image at the bottom, and then do an element-wise multiplication with the feature that we have extracted from the videos, and produce the attention map. So the attention map will then be used to kind of predict whether the whole procedure is successful or not. So we have a cross attention between our input features and our gaze information. We also use something called squeeze and excitation that's described in the left side, in the right side of the image, where you have the global average pooling followed by the fully connected layer. And this is another activation, fully connected layer, and then followed by a sigmoid. So another machine learning model. So the whole task is actually automated, and with this architecture, we are able to improve the accuracy of the ETI task. So these are some of the results that we get. We have improved the baseline, meaning the whole network, the whole framework without gaze information from 89 to 93. We have also improved the mature coefficient from 70 to 85. The F1 score was also improved from 76 to 90. That was a huge improvement. We have also improved the specificity and the sensitivity. So we got a little bit of, we lost some kind of performance in the specificity due to the imbalanced data set that we have here, because we have more successful video than unsuccessful. So the number of data points collected by our team was 454, and we can see that we have very nice ROC curve and PR curve when we combine the framework with gaze information. So there's also the trustworthiness of the network. So the trustworthiness of a model is the confidence that we have on its true prediction. Because if you take a network framework, and if the framework tells you he's 0.6% sure that this procedure is unsuccessful, then you are less likely to trust the model because most of its predictions are going towards 0.5 instead of going towards 0.999. So the trustworthiness is supposed to be skewed towards higher score, so values close to 0.99 or 1% are considered trustworthy, and value towards 0.5 are considered untrustworthy. Okay, so you see the trustworthiness with gaze is actually, this the second picture is 0.93 for unsuccessful. So the network, the framework is about 93% sure when it tells you it's an unsuccessful procedure, and the network is sure of by 90% when it tells you it's unsuccessful when combined with gaze data. Without gaze, we have a very low net trust score of 0.70. Every time the network tells you this procedure is successful, it's by 0.70 or 74%, which is not really trustworthy. So this is really how we we decided to evaluate the trustworthiness of our network, of our model. And at the bottom, you see the math of computing this trustworthiness of our model. Okay. So conclusion is the relevance to combat medicine. We have pretty much designed and improved a life-saving HI procedure in military and emergency context where rapid response is critical. We like to get real-life feedback as one's perform a HI procedure. Also, we have provided an automated and objective method to assess psychomotor skills in high-stress environment. So the whole pipeline is automated. You feed in video data recorded from head-mounted camera, and then the video goes through autoencoder, and then and the feature goes through our attention model, and then we predict whether the procedure is successful or not. So the potential benefit is increased mission readiness and also better patient outcome and improve clinical training efficiency. So this is the conclusion of our approach. Thank you. Okay. Any question? Yeah.
Thank you very much. The model is predicting the success based on the gaze analysis. If the model says that the procedure was unsuccessful and the prediction is correct, it was not successful, can the model also diagnose what the underlying causes are for the failure to be successful in that procedure?
Yes, this is actually part of our studies where we plan in future studies to kind of to give feedback into what exact feedback that tells you where the network looked at and what led to the prediction of successful and successful. So we are able to kind of tell at which time step of our procedure, the trainee failed to kind of perform the right set of activity that's supposed to be the right set of activity to perform. So this is one this is actually part of the study. So the whole study also look at the feedback, and the feedback look at the heat map, and we also give the exact time step where the activity went wrong. Yeah, you do that. So in the whole paper, you will see these different steps. All right. Yeah. No, I see. Okay. No more question? All right.
Can I ask another one?
Okay.
In your work, is the model ever confused by other factors that might change gaze, like distraction or boredom, other reasons why the gaze isn't predicting success?
Yeah, this is actually what the last function tried to correct. In case we have gaze measurement error, maybe by the trainee looking away from the ATI task. By applying this Gaussian convolution, we are able to cancel those points that are really far away from the region of interest. So this is how we do that. Yeah. So the end solution is actually to look at other procedure as well, but we have tested this solution on ETI tasks for.
Can this be done in real time, with real-time feedback, i.e. you're not looking at the right place while you're doing the tube so that the trainee can understand that at the time? Or can this only be used post-intubation practice?
So in our lab, we do post intubation because we have a team collecting the data, and then we feed the data into this model. But the end is really to have an end-to-end approach where we can deploy those framework into head-mounted devices and then get real-time feedback as the medic is performing the ETI procedure. But for now, we are doing anything post-ETI. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Paul.
All right.
The third paper will start right at 5 o'clock, so feel free to take a quick break and please join us for the final presentation.
Are there any authors in here from the previous session? Previous paper? No? Okay. Don't follow up, talk to you.
Okay.
I might not even be able to see it to laser it. Sure. Yes, sir.
Go to the awards meeting?
Yes, sir. I do not. All right, thank you.
Okay, is Charlie on?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, speaker? Good.
I'll introduce you in a couple minutes. I don't want to really start until
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, I can just use that. I won't be. Do you prefer Drew or Thomas?
I go by Drew. Whichever's easier.
Drew's easier. It's
Okay.
less syllable.
Yeah.
Maybe about another 3.
Sure. Yeah. Previous stuff. Just send them. He's gonna do it. I can't really quite see the screen good enough from my angle.
All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to the final paper of the final best paper sessions, of which there were two. This final session is the nominee from the HPA committee. Those of you who were here for the first paper, I told you what HPA stood for. Anyone remember? That's why we call it HPA. Very good. So we're very fortunate to have the final presenter to talk about assessing cognitive workload and mixed reality flight sims for naval aviation. The presenter is Drew Cecil, who's a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps, who's serving in the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force as the Tactical Exercise Control Group Director. Lieutenant Colonel Cecil has accrued over 1,700 flight hours, including over 1,500 hours in the MV-22B, but he's flown in multiple squadrons in Marine Aircraft Group 26, serving as the Fleet Replacement Squadron Instructor, the Night Systems Instructor, and the Aviation Safety Officer. Were you ever the SNACO? No?
I was never the SNACO.
Because you're busy doing other stuff. And Lieutenant Colonel Cecil holds a BS in Aerospace Engineering from the U.S. Naval Academy and an MS in Modeling, Virtual Environments, and Simulation from the Naval Postgraduate School, where he was awarded the Commander George L. Phillips Award as the Outstanding Moves student. So please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Colonel Cecil.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Cecil, and my paper co-authors are listed here on the screen, and our conference paper describes the work that we did in support of my master's research at the Naval Postgraduate School. So while I'm currently serving as a modeling and simulations officer, I'm a Marine Corps Osprey pilot by trade, and prior to reporting to MPS, I flew the Osprey for 10 years out of Marine Corps Air Station New River. And as mentioned, during that time, I accumulated over 1,700 military flight hours and multiple flight leadership and instructor designations to include Night Systems Instructor. So as such, during that time, I was fortunate enough to do a little bit of everything that can be done in the Osprey. And of all those things, my least favorite would have to be Night Systems training in the simulator. And that's because I find that the limitations of the MVGs combined with the reduced light level results in an information degraded environment demanding additional attentional resources, which I find can be physically and mentally taxing. Therefore, when I first saw and read about these two mixed reality flight simulators, my initial thoughts were, that seems miserable. The thought of viewing both my virtual flight environment and cockpit through the displays of a headset for 2 hours just struck me as both difficult and exhausting. On the other hand, this V-22 flight training device represents what I call legacy simulator technology, and it incorporates a fully functional replica cockpit surrounded by projector screens to provide the pilot with visuals of their flight environment. And while I'm no fan of Night Systems training on this type of device, I'm able to scan underneath my night vision goggles, or MVGs, to directly view and interact with my cockpit. On the other hand, I have to scan through the MVGs, the displays of the MVGs, in order to see the flight environment that it's provided on the projector screens. And this is the portion of Night Systems training that I find particularly tiring. So the thought of, well, this is essentially the crux of the problem with video see-through head-mounted displays, is that the pilot would be viewing both the virtual and flight environment and cockpit through the display screens of the headset, which are just a few centimeters in front of their eyes for the duration of the simulator sortie. And it's my experience as a Night Systems instructor with multiple flight hours in the sim, as well as a working knowledge of the human visual system, that led me to recognize that there might be a connection between one's ability to perceive depth and interact with objects in 3 dimensions and their cognitive workload. And while this topic seemed personally interesting to myself, it was also important to me in the Naval Postgraduate School that my subject of research be applicable to the Navy and Marine Corps, and it is. As you can see, the Navy Marine Corps Aviation, or excuse me, the Navy Aviation Vision 2030-2035 as well as the Marine Corps Aviation Plan 2022. Both those documents communicate the service's senior naval aviators' vision for getting after the service's aviation campaign plan and the service chief's directives in light of the National Defense Strategy. And in both cases, the services are calling for cost-effective training solutions that are both distributed and deployable in order to enable training across the country and around the globe. And they both see mixed reality as an enabling technology to accomplish this vision due to their relative low cost, ease of maintenance, and their reduced size as compared to legacy simulators. And the mixed reality headset receiving the greatest level of interest from the Department of the Navy would be a video see-through head-mounted display, which you can see on the left. With this type of display, it incorporates cameras on the front side of the headset, which record the user's physical environment or real environment, and then that is then combined with the virtual environment via graphic shaders to provide the operator with one coherent display. Limitations of this type of headset are reduced visual acuity resulting from limitations in display resolution, as well as the Vergence accommodation conflict, which I'll talk about in a moment. The optical see-through headset might mitigate some of these limitations in the fact that with an optical see-through headset, you're able to look directly through the lenses of the headset to see your real environment in the same way that you might when you're wearing eyeglasses. The virtual environment then occludes the real environment by being displayed on reflective semi-transmissive beam combiners to create the mixed reality environment. However, limitations of this type of headset are primarily a reduction in the user's immersion as compared to a video see-through head-mounted display. And really the essential difference between these two types of displays is the user's ability to either directly or whether they indirectly see their real environment. So as you might guess, correctly perceiving 3D space is critical for interacting with your physical environment and training in mixed reality. Depth cues can be classified as either visual or ocular motor, and it's the ocular motor cues that were central to our study. Vergence is the rotation, or when viewing an object, vergence is the rotation of the eye's axis towards an object of focus. And working in concert with vergence, accommodation is the focus action of the eye's ciliary muscles in order to minimize blur at the focal depth of an object of focus. And this is displayed on the figure to the left on your screen. In the upper box, you can see what the left eye would see when focused on a Rubik's Cube and accommodated at a far distance versus what the left eye would see when focused on the beach ball and accommodated at the near distance. And the conflict introduced by HMDs is depicted in the figure on the right. As you can see in boxes A and C, the vergence and focal distances both are in agreement. And in box C, that results in a natural blur gradient, as might be kind of difficult to tell with this imagery, but natural blur gradient in box C. However, in box B, you can see that the eyes converge on a point of an object in 3D space, but they accommodate for the focal distance of the display screen. And because everything is rendered in focus, you have an unrealistic blur gradient, which just say there is no blur gradient for box D. And so other studies have, this essentially causes the vergence and accommodation conflict, which other studies have shown can be tied to visual and cognitive fatigue. Although mixed reality head-mounted displays introduce depth perception issues in the form of vergence accommodation conflict, the effects of mixed reality headsets on cognitive workload are not as well known. Longo et al.'s 2022 definition of mental workload, Wickens et al.'s human information processing model, and Wickens' multiple resource theory formed our understanding of cognitive workload. And the key elements that informed our approach are, one, that human cognitive system possesses finite resources. Circumstances and factors experienced affect the task. Internal and external factors influence one's level of attention and effort, affecting workload. From our understanding of cognitive workload, vergence accommodation conflict, and mixed reality headsets, we formulated these two hypotheses. The first would be that mixed reality head-mounted displays will result in significantly greater cognitive workload as compared to legacy displays. And the second, that video see-through head-mounted displays will result in a significantly greater workload than optical see-through head-mounted displays. In order to investigate our hypotheses, we formulated a 2x3 repeated measures design utilizing 2 workload conditions and 3 display methods, which were used to display aspects of a multi-attribute task battery. We utilized a task battery developed by the United States Army Air Medical Research Laboratory, which was developed in coordination with Tennessee State University and modeled after NASA's MAP-B2. The benefits of using a multi-attribute task battery such as this is that it allows us to standardize a participant's workload condition utilizing aviation similar tasks while not being so complex as to require participants to have prior flight experience. The aviation related subtasks with this MAP-B are system monitoring, where a user recognizes and acknowledges caution lights, a tracking task where a user keeps a ball centered on the crosshairs of a reticle, resource management, where users control the level of fuel in 2 tanks by manipulating fuel pumps, and then communications, where they listen for their call sign and then adjust frequencies as directed. Also, not pictured here, we also asked users to provide a subjective workload rating via slide scale, which served as a secondary task. And participants completed 3 10-minute trials, 1 for each display method, which was used to display the tracking task, and those were provided to the users in randomized order. Our study utilized multiple display types for various purposes. You can see in both images on the desktop, we utilized 3 tablets, which provided the users or participants with a touchscreen enabled graphical user interface of the MAP-B subtasks to include communications, resource management, system monitoring, and the subjective workload rating. And then we also utilized 3 displays for the user to view the tracking task. We utilized a computer monitor, which is seen on the left, which acted as our legacy technology, as it's akin to a projector screen. And then we also utilized 2 mixed reality headsets. We utilized the Microsoft HoloLens 2 as our optical see-through headset, and the Vario XR4 as our video see-through headset. And both mixed reality headsets provide the user with a virtual screen, presenting them with the imagery of the tracking task. Our study included 2 independent variables. As I just spoke to, the tracking task display method included a legacy, a video see-through, and optical see-through display method. And then we utilized a low and high workload condition. We chose to use 2 workload conditions in order to mitigate the possibility that any single workload condition might prove to be either underwhelming or overwhelming to the user. And the event frequencies associated with those workload conditions are provided in the chart on the screen, and they were validated by the work done by others. Our study also had multiple dependent variables in the form of subjective, physiological, and task performance measures. For subjective, we utilized a multi-dimensional NASA task load index, which was collected at the end of each trial. During each trial, we collected the unidimensional continuous subjective workload assessment graph, or CSWAG. And then after each trial, we also asked users to complete a simulator sickness questionnaire. For physiological, we collected participant heart rate in order to determine their heart rate variability via, as defined by the root mean square successive differences. And then for task performance measures, we collected their performance on the MAP-B's various subtasks, as well as their reaction time to providing a subjective workload rating on the CSWAG. So displayed here is our test bench setup. On the left, you can see our legacy configuration. You'll notice I'm not wearing a headset. And we've got the computer monitor in place acting as our legacy display for the tracking task. And then on the right side is our mixed reality setup, wearing the Vario headset, and then we remove the computer monitor from the test bench for these configurations. This video depicts us testing our test bench. The operator, you'll notice, is utilizing a joystick which is offset to their right, which is how they interacted with the tracking task. And then they're also interacting with the touchscreen enabled user interfaces for the MAP-B subtasks. A statistical power analysis that we conducted revealed that we would require 29 participants in order to detect moderate effects by use of a multivariate analysis of variance, or a MANOVA. We were able to collect data on 30 participants. All participants were either students or faculty at the Naval Postgraduate School, and they represented multiple occupational studies, however, only 2 of which were pilots. So getting after the data, we performed that multivariate analysis of variance, or MANOVA, which revealed that there were significant effects by the display type on cognitive workload as defined by the dependent variables that we collected during the trials. In all cases, p-values returned were less than 0.001, and however, this analysis merely identifies that there were significant differences between the display types present, but provides no further analysis. Therefore, we conducted a discriminant analysis to further investigate the results of the MANOVA while preserving the multivariate nature of the data. The discriminant analysis returned a primary task function, which explained approximately 90% of the variance, which can be visualized by the lateral separation of the display group centroids along the x-axis. The secondary task function explains approximately the remaining 10% of variance in the data, and a Wilks Lambda test confirmed that the primary task function was statistically significant with a p-value of 0.01. We also produced a structural matrix which revealed that the system monitoring, communications, and tracking subtasks were highly correlated with the primary task function, and the C-SWAG reaction time and heart rate variability highly correlated with the secondary task function. And then the classification results on the right showed that the discriminant functions correctly predicted group membership of display trials or display groups for the legacy trials 70% of the time, video see-through 53.3% of the time, and optical see-through displays 26.7% of the time. We also conducted ANOVAs for the individual dependent variables, utilizing a Holm-Bonferroni correction to reduce type 1 error. 4 of the dependent variables revealed significant effects by the display type on that variable. 2 of those are displayed here, tracking and system monitoring. In both cases, users or participants performed better with legacy displays as compared to mixed reality. And then within mixed reality, they performed better when utilizing optical see-through head-mounted displays as compared to video see-through. The other 2 dependent variables collected during the trials that showed significant differences were the C-SWAG ratings and reaction times. For C-SWAG ratings, they assessed a lower mental workload and had faster reaction times with legacy technology as compared to mixed reality headsets. And then within mixed reality, they had faster reaction times and assessed a lower mental workload with optical see-through head-mounted displays as compared to the video see-through displays. And then we also conducted ANOVAs for the NASA Task Load Index. We conducted this separately since we collected this data after the trial. And the results for user task load ratings are similar to that of the C-SWAG reaction times, in that they assessed that legacy displays required less mental workload as compared to mixed reality, and that optical see-through displays required less mental workload than video see-through within mixed reality. We also conduct t-tests comparing the different display groups, and in all cases, significant differences were found. So there's a few implications, I believe, for naval aviation training. Our workload demonstrated that mixed reality head-mounted displays reduced pilot performance, resulted in slower reaction times, and higher subjective workload ratings. So implications for naval aviation training stem from those results. First, aircraft model managers need to differentiate between mixed reality and legacy simulators. as they currently identify in TNR manuals or training and readiness manuals, as events being either aircraft required, simulator required, aircraft preferred, simulator preferred. They similarly need to identify which events are ideally suited for mixed reality or legacy devices in order to best match capabilities and limitations against event goals and performance standards. Second, aircrew should be informed. The failure for aircrew to understand the effects of mixed reality devices undermine their productive and effective use. And in particular, instructors and evaluators, as well as those who make recommendations or decisions in squadron standardization boards, would be the primary audience for this information. And then finally, we need to update CNAF 3710. CNAF 3710 currently talks to air sickness, simulator sickness. However, our study through the use of sim sickness questionnaires determined that mixed reality results in greater sim sickness symptoms as compared to legacy technology. So pilots need to understand that the sim sickness symptoms experienced in legacy simulators might not correspond with what they will experience in mixed reality. And it's important to know that our study was not specific to any particular aircraft or mission type, so we did not evaluate against any performance standards, and we're not making a suggestion that mixed reality head-mounted displays are not suitable for fulfilling flight training requirements. Merely, we identify human factors that are worthy for discussion. Our study and our paper identified several limitations. In the interest of transparency, we list those here. And we additionally identify areas for future work, which include understanding how the results translate to actual aircraft and training events. And this concludes my presentation. So at this time, I'll turn the floor over for questions.
You started off by talking about your experience in the night environment, right? In the visual environment here, it was a day environment. So do you perceive any eye strain associated with using MUGs and eye strain associated with using MR to end up with different results?
No, so the differences that we really built our design around to get after was one's interaction with their real environment. Yeah, in a night environment, there's reduced light levels, so you're operating in a somewhat information-limited environment, but you're still able to utilize your natural human depth perception to assess an object's position in three-dimensional space, utilizing your depth perception and distance estimation, and those natural human depth perception processes are interrupted through, in particular, video see-through head-mounted displays through the form of divergence and accommodation conflict. So, whether you take this to day or to night, I think night will make things more difficult. But in each case, I would expect virtual reality to be more difficult than training without virtual reality. Now, how that would compare to like simulating night vision goggles with virtual reality or mixed reality in this case versus actually training with night vision goggles, I would be speculating at that point, but I would expect that simulating night vision goggles with mixed reality would still prove to produce higher mental workload than night vision goggles because you are still utilizing the mixed reality headset to perceive and interact with your physical environment. Sir?
Did you explore familiarity of the subjects with mixed reality?
We did collect in our demographics, we asked that question. 76.67% did have prior experience with either virtual reality or mixed reality. And while we're on this slide, 40% had experience with the MAP-B as well in the form of the NASA tool.
Because the more you use it, the less susceptible you are to becoming sick.
Yes, sir.
Right? So if they were brand new to mixed reality headsets, then they could not perform as well, right? So you consider running the experiments multiple times and collecting
Yes, sir. And that's a limitation that we identified in our study, the limitation of just conducting the 3 10-minute trials. And that's an area for future work. Sir.
Would you, if you had to make a recommendation to researchers who build these things, are there design changes that can be made to improve the use of these optical see-throughs, the virtual reality modeling headsets?
No, sir, I don't think so. I think the divergence accommodation conflict is going to be inherent to the concept of operations for a mixed reality headset. So it's going to be a problem or a feature that's just inherent to that type of headset. Without some form of significant rework in how the headsets operate, one thing that I mentioned that is, as far as I know, common to mixed reality head-mounted displays is that objects tend to be rendered in focus. There are some headsets that are starting to provide areas of focus while other areas are then blurred out. I think that's more for a performance standpoint, to not devote so much computational power to providing a high-resolution display to the entire headset. But I don't see that reducing divergence accommodation conflict, which is the inherent problem. Sir? Okay. Sir?
I've heard from other studies that pilots that then go into a VR environment or a mixed reality environment experience nausea more so than or cyber sickness than people that have never had any actual flight experience. They've done all simulators, never been in an actual aircraft. Did that prove out with your 2 pilots in your scenario?
So we disassociated the data collected from who provided it. However, in general, through the 30 data sets that we collected, we did find that participants assessed greater simulator sickness symptoms with the mixed reality as compared to the legacy displays. Sure.